Truth Versus.
What we can do as
Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. A global artificial intelligence summit kicks off in New Delhi with big issues from job disruption to child safety being discussed as India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the 5-day AI summit at 5 p.m. today, which aims to declare a shared roadmap for global AI governance and collaboration. According to Syria's Foreign Ministry, Kate Forbes, president of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, met Qutaiba Kadish, director of the International Cooperation Department, Syria, to discuss the Federation's humanitarian work in Syria. According to Indonesian Army spokesperson Doni Pramono, Indonesia is preparing 1,000 troops for possible deployment to Gaza by early April as part of a proposed multinational peacekeeping force. Pramono said the final decision rests with the government, adding that a total of 8,000 Indonesian soldiers will be ready for deployment by June. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, China will grant visa-free entry to Canadian and British nationals starting tomorrow till the end of the year, leaving the United States as the only Five Eyes country without the visa-free access. The policy takes effect as China marks the start of the Lunar New Year. According to the Japanese Foreign Ministry and the U.S. State Department, Japan also pledged $17.8 million to NATO for support to Ukraine, while Japanese Foreign Minister and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio agreed in Munich to accelerate coordination for Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's planned March visit to Washington. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that any deal between the United States and Iran must involve the removal of all enriched uranium from Iran as well as Tehran's ability to enrich more. His comments come as Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi heads to Switzerland for the second round of renewed nuclear talks. U.S. President Donald Trump said Board of Peace member states will announce at an upcoming meeting on Thursday a pledge of more than $5 billion for reconstruction and humanitarian efforts in Gaza. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has published a list of over 300 prominent figures mentioned in the files of U.S. financier Jeffrey Epstein. The letter lists all former and current officials or politically significant figures whose names have been mentioned at least once. Now for this hour, we start with Africa. The African Union has reiterated its call to recognize colonization as a crime against humanity. A decision made during the closing session of the 39th Ordinary Session in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, chairperson of the African Union Commission, has expressed solidarity with Palestinians, reaffirming Africa's support for Palestinian independence. The Assembly also adopted the AU's 2026 theme, focusing on sustainable water availability and sanitation to achieve the goals of Agenda 2063. Discussions during the summit covered peace and security, institutional reforms, global governance, and the importance of historical justice, particularly regarding colonization and the transatlantic slave trade. The Assembly emphasized the need for African unity and action on critical development issues. Let's listen into what AUC Chairperson Mahmoud Ali Yusuf has shared.
That the conference recognize, colonization as a crime against humanity. That's very important. And we also the conference expressed its solidarity with Palestine and the Palestinian people, given the circumstances now and what is going on in Gaza and the West Bank. I think it had a more, let's say, symbolic importance than anything else. But the African Union member countries supports the rights of the people of Palestine to become independent and have their own statehood.
Now for this, we welcome Mr. Ayanuga Olugbenga Paul. He's a public affairs analyst, joins us live from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you very much, Mr. Paul, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Thank you, Asuma.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, African Union has reiterated call for recognizing colonization as a crime against humanity. How significant is this, and how, this after being colonized, Africa is still suffering, and not just Africa, but many countries across the globe, including India, still sees the shadows of the colonization?
Yes, thank you very much once again. I think the call for the criminalization and saying it as it is concerning colonialism is long overdue. And we must give kudos to the African Union in their efforts to call out Western nations and tell the world now that the crime of colonization is a crime against humanity. The colonizers would often want to say, oh, they came to colonize to help us become more civilized, more civil. But you see, all the historical documents that have come out have shown that all the historical documents that we have got has shown that that is not the case. When Europe was still in the backwaters, when they do not have proper sanitation, when they do not even have proper technology to do a whole lot of things, especially in medical care. Africa and India and many other countries that they eventually came to colonize, were leading the way. I think they were only able to colonize these people because they exploited the hospitality and generosity of our forefathers, who are always welcoming to strangers, who are always hospitable to strangers, not knowing that those strangers have hidden agenda. For example, when they came to Africa, many of their records shows that many houses in Africa don't have doors because there is nothing like thieves anywhere in Africa. And so that trust, that basis of community shared, properties and everything is what many of the African forefathers use in relating with them before the poison chalice of the so-called westernization kind of civilization, came to destroy the entire fabric of African justice system, humanity, dignity, and so on. I mean, even up till now, there are several things in the world that shows us that Africans are given to peace, to hospitality, and that's why they still keep exploring and colonizing us till today. For example, there are about 70 countries or more in the world that are of African origin, that are of black origin, and none of those 70 countries can tell you that they have weapons of mass destruction, or neither are they interested or actively pursuing the process of acquiring a weapon of mass destruction, because it's not just in our DNA, to look for destruction of human lives, pillaging of people's property. It's not just in our DNA. But you see, the Europeans, I think it's in their DNA to go and destroy everywhere. I mean, they plundered the wealth of India, for example, and you can see that post-colonialism, you see how the Indian wealth grew back, and the European wealth is declining because they cannot steal it like they used to during colonial. So African Union calling for now that there should be reparation, I think is significant and long overdue.
If you can briefly share with us, as since this is, like you highlighted, it is long overdue, how will the justice or accountability look like?
Well, I think justice and accountability will look like, one, let all Europeans hands off Africa. Many of the Francophone countries who cannot have their own central bank, for example, who are still tied to the apron rope of France because France intentionally make it impossible for them to be free except through a coup or bloodshed, like in the case of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, who are freed themselves right now. They made it impossible for others to use democracy to free themselves. Let many of these European countries, I know that England is still collecting ground rent on some places in Nigeria, despite several years after independence. Let them free us, That's what justice will look like. And all the artifacts, all the treasures of our land will be taken away that are sitting in both private and public museums across different European countries should be returned back. That is what justice would look like. And like
Thank
they
you.
would always want to collect repatriation, if reverse were to be the case, they should quantify the loss in human life and
Yes.
property and pay back the government of each country so affected in Africa. That is what justice look like. But will we be able to get that? I
Yes.
doubt it, because many of these European nations know
Mr.
that they
Paul.
will first and foremost go bankrupt if they try to pay reparation, and of course it will affect their foreign
Yes.
policy
Yes.
strength in the world.
Mr.
So
Paul.
they will do everything to make sure that they don't pay.
Yes, indeed. We will be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Mr. Anugalu Bengapol, for joining us today and sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Now we move on to UK. The UK's government is considering bringing forward its defence spending target, aiming to reach 3% of GDP by 2029, a year ahead of schedule. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer recently emphasised the need for increased defence expenditure, citing the rising threat from Russia. Currently, the UK allocates 2.3% of GDP to defence, with plans to reach 2.5% by 2027. However, due to rising costs, there is growing pressure to meet the 3% target sooner. The move could cost an additional £17.3 billion annually, as the Ministry of Defence faces a £28 billion shortfall in meeting existing commitments. Discussions are ongoing and no final decision has been made yet. However, this potential shift in defence spending plans has been recognized as necessary to strengthen the country's defence capabilities. Meanwhile, the pressure from NATO allies, especially the United States, is pushing the UK to accelerate its defence investments. Further updates will follow as the decision-making process continues. The UK government is considering bringing forward its defence spending. The UK government is considering bringing forward its defence spending target, aiming to reach 3% of GDP by 2029, a year ahead of schedule. UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has recently emphasised the need for increased defence expenditure, citing the rising threat from Russia. Currently, the UK allocates 2.3% of GDP to defence, with plans to reach 2.5% by 2027. Now we welcome Ms. Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international affairs analyst, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ms. Dasgupta, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, as US has pushed European countries to step up their defense, but of course they have lost a lot in given how forward or how more developed US, Russia, Chinese defense is now. How do you think Europe and UK, especially in this case, will have to do, or what do you think they have to do to make up for the time lost and the developing that they need to catch up with in terms of counter or protecting themselves against any threat?
Well, in Munich, I believe Starmer made a statement where he said that they would have to spend more and fast, and that is, I believe, the solution that all of EU and UK or any Western power as such have decided to go forth with: spend more, spend fast, which is dicey because none of their economies seem to be doing too well. And to increase expenditure means they are putting a burden on their already strained economic resources. But they have no choice because they have realized that they were leaning on borrowed strength of USA, and in the hands of Donald Trump 2.0, that particular strength is a weapon against them, which is forcing them to be vassal states rather than partners in any form of strategic partnership, including NATO. So they've realized this, that in their complicity during the post-Cold War era has led them to become lesser of a world power, and they have, and all of them, I believe, and it begins with UK because it's easier, it's independent, it does not have to comply with EU norms. So just the country and its government can change out their plans, fast forward them, accelerate them in whichever way that suits them. So I believe those targets that have been set were supposed to be achieved by 2030, but now they have been moved up by 1 year only, by 2029, as Keir Starmer has stated. And that's only because the current government term will only last till 2029. So they want to finish their objectives before they hand over the regime to whoever wins the nation's heart. And they have to address their black hole as such in funding, because there is already a shortage in their budgets for defense spending itself, and they're replacing their legacy equipment with more current advanced equipment, and that also needs money. So they're going to have to do this, apart from the fact that they want to counter the, I believe that is what is it being referenced as the axis of authoritarian states is what it is called, which is North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia. So to counter the rise of this axis, they want to increase their spending, and to do that they have to be war fighting ready, which they are not even in terms of conscription, and they're finding it very difficult to find men who would actually don a uniform and go to fight. So they have social issues along with just budgetary issues, but they're at least trying to focus on making EU in its, I believe they are calling it the pre-war era, not the post-Cold War era. Now they have want to be part of the pre-war era, where their military might is not insignificant or old or rusted. So this is what is driving Keir Starmer and EU into looking into increased defense spending, not just because NATO demands them to be so, but because they've realized that without actually having the muscle of defense forces, their word has lesser value.
So, building on that, do you think that this is timely, or do you think it's a little too late? As we see Europe being sidelined in so many things, and now we even see them being sidelined or not even in the table when negotiations happen between Ukraine and Russia.
You have got it spot on. They are not even on the negotiating table because they are vassal states. They do what Trump or USA tells them to do. And they have a 4-year war was possible for Russia, not just because Russia is doing well or Ukraine is small. They have poured in a whole lot of aid and equipment into Ukraine to resist Russia. But they've also realized that had they been better armed, probably this war would have come to the negotiating table earlier without giving this much of an advantage to Russia. So they realize, unfortunately, after the fact, that the Ukraine war is telling them that them being part of a strategic defense organization like NATO does not secure their right to be on the table and make decisions being held. If you remember earlier, last year, Trump had all the EU nation heads sitting like he's the principal and they are the derelict students of his school, and he was talking to them in very much the same strain. There was a mutual praising that was happening. He was giving everybody a chance to praise him. So the sycophancy of Trump has made them realize their delicate state in this particular kind of coalition. And now we will see an increased race for arming themselves, not just in UK but in all EU nations, because they realize that their security is only as good as their own weapons and army. They should not be dependent or so codependent on each other or even USA for that. So they are late to the game, but better late than never. And even though they are not at the talking table today, they are not ignored completely on the trade table, so they've not completely lost the plot. Let's hope that they understand the balance between overarming themselves and becoming an aggressive nation like USA, who is trying to force down every trade deal through military means. Let's hope they steer clear of that particular ethical moral dilemma, and they only build up to be able to defend themselves effectively and have their voices heard.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dasgupta, for sharing that deep insight with us. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, moving to Russia, the mother of late Russian opposition leader and Putin critic Alexei Navalny says she feels vindicated by a European assessment, concluding that her son died from poisoning, and is calling for those responsible to be brought to justice. Speaking to reporters near Navalny's grave in Moscow on the second anniversary of his death, she said the findings confirmed what the family believed from the beginning, that he did not simply die in prison but was killed. She said the family expects it may take time to establish who was responsible, but stressed their hope that the truth will emerge and justice will prevail in Russia. The comments come days after 5 European countries released a report saying Navalny was fatally poisoned with a rare toxin. Western diplomats laid flowers at his grave to mark the anniversary. Russia has never fully explained the circumstances of his death and has rejected the European assessment, dismissing it as unfounded. Let's listen into what Navalny's mother has shared.
Да, я уверена в этом. Рано или поздно это все равно будет. Вы видите, вот 2 года всего прошло, и мы уже знаем, чем он был отравлен. Я думаю, что пройдет какое-то время, и мы узнаем, кто это сделал. Обязательно. Конечно, мы хотим, чтобы это было в нашей стране, и чтобы справедливость восторжествовала, и чтобы мы их узнали всех поименно. И тех, кто... Ну, я уже говорила о том, что заказчик знает весь мир, я просто повторяю свои слова, а мы хотим, чтобы узнали каждого, кто принимал в этом.
Now we welcome back Ms. Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international affairs analyst, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ms. Dasgupta, for staying with us. Now, you know, how significant is that this report, the frog poison that was found in Navalny's body, has come forward, and also the fact that Russia has never declared or, declared how he passed away in details. Why would Putin do that, and how significant was Navalny and his opposition?
So, Putin has a history of having people who are very opposed to him die under mysterious circumstances. Now, this statement can be read either which ways, where it can be said that he gets them killed, or that people who oppose Putin have really bad luck, but there is a significantly large number of people who were his opponents and were found dead with very, very mysterious circumstances. Now, this Navalny's death is, of course, has a cloud hanging over it too, but the weird part is that all of EU, which is a geopolitical enemy of Russia, they are completely at the opposite sides of the spectrum in Europe itself, and all of them have decided to say that yes, he was poisoned. Now, how did that happen? Was the body given forensic was given over forensic testing? No. The waste, the body waste of supposedly Navalny was smuggled out of Russia for examination. Now, therein lies the problem. One, it is smuggled out. There is no direct chain of custody. You cannot verify whether this particular sample was Navalny's or not. We just have to take EU's word for it. And I'm not saying that their word doesn't count for anything, because there are so many nations who have come forth with that forensic analysis and have put their weight behind it. I believe, now that of course is where the question hangs, is in 2020, Navalny had some experience with doctors in the European nations, and That's why they have his DNA sample. And so they feel that they can confirm that this particular waste belongs to Navalny. Now, getting it spiked is the second part. That can happen to a sample, but what they analyzed was that the poison had metabolic footprints. That means it was biologically processed by the body and then become part of the waste. So this shows that, at least if we are to believe the European nations, then this waste did belong to Navalny, and it did have those particular spectrums that showed that he was poisoned. However, we have to take their word for the DNA samples. You know that it is very normal for nations to manufacture evidences to suit their narratives, as we have seen in the case of Gaza. So you will realize that we cannot put faith in believe it because we say so, because we are righteous. Yes. They said so many other things, so we can't put weight in that. Russia has put out an official cause. They have said it was a heart attack due to deteriorating conditions. And the leaked documents have lack of veracity because they are not produced in original. And the leaked sample does not have veracity because it lacks chain of custody. USA that is why distancing itself from this particular incident. They said they believe their partners and allies in Europe, but they are not a signatory to this forensic report because they understand that there are a large number of gaps and the intent behind it doesn't seem as clean and clear.
You have covered it all. Thank you very much, as always, Ms. Dasgupta, for sharing that insight. Thank you. Now we move on to Kenya. Kenya's main airport in Nairobi is facing flight delays due to a labor dispute in the aviation sector. According to the country's airports operator, officials said operations at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport have been affected by disagreements between the Aviation Workers Union and the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, leading to disruptions in air traffic services. In a separate statement, national carrier Kenya Airways has confirmed that air traffic control delays were impacting some departures and arrivals at the airport. Passengers have been advised to check flight statuses with their airlines as delays continue to ripple through schedules at East Africa's busiest aviation hub. Authorities say efforts are underway to resolve the dispute and restore normal operations, but have not given a timeline for when services will fully return to schedule. Now we move on to our tech news. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Sunday that he will seek broader powers to regulate internet access, arguing stronger action is needed to protect children from fast-changing digital risks. The government plans to consult on an Australian-style social media ban for under-16s and extend existing laws to cover AI chatbots that create sexualized images without consent. Prime Minister Starmer said greater executive powers would allow faster action as technology evolves through, though critics warn this could reduce parliamentary scrutiny and affect adult privacy and free speech. Some websites have already blocked UK users over age verification rules, and officials say future proposals may also address the use of virtual private networks to bypass restrictions. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.